Okay.
All right, there you go. Should be good.
All right. Thank you. So the knowledge base is actually consists of several modules. So the first module that was released was the AOP Wiki, and the initial release there was in 2014. And so we're getting ready to do release major release number 2 to this fall, winter. The Effectopedia module for the AOP-KB is in beta mode, has been in beta mode for the past year. So it is available. People are encouraged to use it, and they're planning to have a stable version by the end of this year or early in next year. The AOP Explorer module is going to be a downloadable tool that will interact with the knowledge base, and its anticipated release is sometime this fall, winter timeframe. The Intermediate Effects database is part of the European IECLID system. So the harmonized templates for that were included in the IECLID 6.0 release and are available for use as information gets entered into that database over the next couple years. We'll be building modules on top of that will interface with the other modules in the knowledge base. All of this is coordinated in 2 ways. So one, we have a mutually agreed upon XML schema that will determine the format of the data that interchange directly from one module of the knowledge base to the other. In addition, in the very near future, the EAOP portal will be released by the OECD, and all of the modules of the knowledge base, both the 2 that are online now as well as the 2 that will be coming online later, will be publishing their information into the EAOP portal. So the idea is, moving forward, the EAOP portal will give you access to the entire content of the knowledge base, and will give you links out to the individual modules for more information. As you might imagine, with this agreed upon XML schema for both import and export, we expect to also facilitate the development of third-party tools outside of our efforts. So in 2014, Villeneuve et al. Published a paper that really outlined 5 principles of AOP development, and the knowledge base has been developed around these 5 principles. So I really wanted to work through the knowledge base in terms of these 5 principles. The first 2 we covered in the initial slide, where I discussed the different components of the AOPs and this need for not including chemical-specific information in the definition itself. The knowledge base is built on a formal ontology, which the XML schema is also based upon, and so those 2 components are a key piece of the knowledge base. The next principle is that an individual AOP is a pragmatic unit of development and evaluation. And so a lot of the criticism that has been levied against AOPs is that they're overly simplistic and don't accurately capture the biology. And that's really what this principle is designed to address. And that is, we don't anticipate AOPs as the end product for use. We anticipate AOPs as the method for developing information, assembling information that eventually can be used. And so the knowledge base is really built around this principle, and especially the wiki and the Effectopedia modules. So if we go with the individual AOP for the moment, and think about how we would go about describing the information, organizing the information, and evaluating that information, we really come down to 3 main factors that determine, again, keeping in mind that our goal is to measure things on this end where we can do it quickly and cheaply, and make predictions on this end. And so there's really 3 main considerations that we have. One is what is the evidence that we have that a perturbation here will actually propagate through this AOP? And as you might imagine, that's kind of the fundamental basis of defining that AOP. The second question is the quantitative understanding. So, okay, I know that at some level a perturbation here can result in something here, but how big of a perturbation do I need? And then the last thing is, okay, I have a certain level of perturbation here that I know will lead to something here. Are there any other factors that could hit one of these intermediate key events and somehow alter that magnitude so that in some cases a given perturbation here will make it through, but in other cases maybe it would not? And so the knowledge base really seeks to address all three of these things. And the first two are really addressed at the level of the AOP, and the last one I'll come back to later in the talk. So if we take those first two pieces, we can think about phases of AOP development in terms of three steps. So the first step is you've got to lay out the AOP itself. You come up with hypothetical key events and then the relationships between those. The second step is a formal evaluation of that AOP, and that obviously will oftentimes result in changes in what you think the key events are and how you describe the key event relationships. So there's not a one-way street. There's a lot of back and forth and overlap among the phases. And then you can imagine for AOPs where you want more quantitative information, then you would need to quantitatively describe this. And there again, the quantitative descriptions could be done in parallel with the formal evaluation, or they could be done after the fact. Typically, you don't have existing data sufficient for a fully quantitatively described AOP. So if you're trying to build an AOP from existing scientific literature, it tends to fall more in this camp. If you are prospectively doing a study to build your AOP, you have the luxury of maybe moving straight to this. So the AOP Wiki really focuses on this middle step, and that is the qualitative evaluation of the AOP. And so that's what I will be going. And in particular, there's an emphasis on collaborative development. So we've really tried to build the Wiki around a crowdsourcing model where individual people are not required to develop an entire AOP or certainly a large number of AOPs by themselves. This is where we loop back to the OECD handbook. So the AOP Wiki has been developed hand in hand with the development of the OECD handbook. So the OECD handbook actually provides examples as it goes through how you should describe and evaluate an AOP. It provides examples of how that information would be put into the AOP Wiki. And so if you follow that guidance and put the information in the proper place in the Wiki, you can actually generate a document that is roughly equivalent to if you took a Microsoft Word template and just filled out all of the proper sections and kept the right section headings and so forth. Now, doing it online in the Wiki not only allows for more collaboration in developing it, but it has some other benefits that I will describe later. But for right now, we can just think in terms of if you fill out all the information in the Wiki, it will give you a document that accurately describes the evidence in support of that AOP. And this just shows an example of this. So this is an AOP that has actually been endorsed by the OECD, and it was developed by Carol Yock at Health Canada. And so this is the author's view of the AOP, which they can upload to the Wiki. So here they've done it in diagram form. We've got 4 key events and looks like 5 key event relationships. What they would enter into the Wiki is more tabular. So you have an upstream key event, the type of connection, and your downstream key event. And then you can evaluate both the evidence supporting that, that key event relationship as well as your level of quantitative understanding of that relationship. Once you've entered all that information, the Wiki will give you a diagram that hopefully will look something like the original author's diagram. And that's kind of a sanity check that, yes, indeed, you entered the information here. So then the next question comes is, what are these dotted lines that we see in both of these figures? So as I mentioned before, all of the evidence supporting our AOP goes on one of these key event relationships. So as an example here, if I have a wealth of scientific literature that shows that alkylation of DNA leads to mutations, but those specific studies did not address whether incorrect or insufficient DNA repair was a part of that process, then it's not really appropriate for me to reference those papers in the context of alkylation of DNA, overwhelming DNA repair, and incorrect DNA repair leading to mutations. But I do want to capture that information, and so these indirect key events allow me a way to do that. And so the evidence in support of the flux through this part of the pathway is not only due to our direct relationships, but also due to the evidence supporting this indirect relationship. So once you have this information, the AOP can provide you with an understanding of how things that we measure down here at the toxicity pathway level can connect to the things at the regulatory endpoints. And systematic evaluation of that evidence can allow us to make decisions like, well, if my evidence is really weak in this particular point in my AOP, I may be less likely to accept a positive hit in a toxicity pathway alone. But if I could supplement that with some type of biomarker measurement that would get me over this hump, I might feel a lot more confident in that decision. Alternatively, if I'm doing research in this area, I could look at this and say, hey, this is a piece of information that if I were able to fill this gap, could enable better use of the toxicity pathway information at this end of my AOP. So already we've gained quite a bit, but it doesn't stop there. So the AOP also provides a scaffold for our data, and this includes both chemical-specific data as you're assembling information for a chemical-specific decision, but it also allows us to assemble data from multiple chemicals and start getting at this quantitative understanding of the response-response relationships. So now thinking how this key event leads to this key event rather than how a chemical's dose response affects those two key events individually. And so these are just some examples of the types of data that can be applied. And this is where the Effectopedia module really comes into play. So Effectopedia goes a step beyond what the wiki does, and it allows you to explicitly capture both the assays and the data from those assays for specific chemicals. And it does that with an eye towards facilitating computational modeling and eventual quantitative AOPs. So as an example, here we have an in vitro assay, and so we can capture the information for that in vitro assay. We can capture data from that assay for a specific chemical. In this case, it was fadrazole. We can capture in vivo data the same way, and so on and so forth for pretty much any type of data that we would capture about, and in this case, we're looking at a single key event relationship, so one subset of this AOP. Once we have all of that information captured, then we can start evaluating the response-response relationship. So here we look at dose response for a given chemical under a given set of circumstances for our upstream key event, and the same chemical, same circumstances for our downstream key event. And so now we can start looking at this response-response relationship. So how do changes in this key event map to changes in that key event? And if we can accurately describe that using a set of reference chemicals, then we can start taking information here and making predictions about what the expected changes would be in this downstream key event. And again, both of these are enabled by the Effectopedia module of the knowledge base. And so hopefully I've convinced you now that there is some utility in breaking things down into these individual AOPs, because it does allow us to address these individual pieces systematically and assemble that data. And so hopefully you're also convinced as to why the knowledge base is kind of built around this principle. However, if the knowledge base stopped there, then we still haven't gained a whole lot, because our very next principle is to say, well, that's a pragmatic unit for development, but we acknowledge that it's not really useful when you actually go to apply these things. So we didn't stop there, and the knowledge base is very much attuned towards these AOP networks and trying to move AOPs into a more application framework. So within the AOP wiki, it is specifically designed so that as you enter an individual AOP, if you have a second AOP that shares those same key events and key event relationships, you can reuse those key events and key event relationships. Now, this gives an immediate benefit to the author because now you only have to fill this information out once and then you reuse it. You say, well, I can copy and paste, but if you then go and update one, you've got to update all three. Now you update it one place, it propagates through all three. And as we move to more collaborative projects, it becomes much more manageable. So just from the standpoint of the individual AOPs, this has many advantages. But you can also see immediately that the way this information is actually stored in our wiki is as a network. So our first AOP has 2 unique key events, but then it funnels into the second key event of our second AOP, and then both of those AOPs then funnel through, they end with the AOP that starts with estrogen receptor signaling, changes in estrogen receptor signaling. So you can see that even though you're entering these things in a pragmatic fashion so that it makes it easy to undergo this evaluation, what we have in the end is a full network that can be used for all of the applications. And this just shows how that would look in the wiki. So this shows one of those 2 examples from the previous slide, and the triangles within these views actually represent other AOPs in the wiki that share these key events. So the 2 that we saw on the previous slide are here and here. Now the wiki stops here, so you would be able to click on those triangles and get to those other AOPs. But within the wiki, because our focus is on the development and evaluation of these AOPs, we really don't get that much into the network side of things. Effectopedia does move in that direction because they're interested in quantitative models, so you can build small networks within Effectopedia and model across those. And the AOP Explorer actually goes to the other extreme, and pretty much everything is viewed in the context of a global or subglobal network. And so now if we take a step back from this and we think about how these AOPs and AOP networks fit into a broader systems biology context, we've got our individual AOPs that we've now developed one at a time, and now they form this interconnected network. And so the first thing you say when you look at this, so the first thing we can say now is so now we have this interconnected network, and we can start to think about, okay, what implications does this have for those modifying factors that I mentioned, which was our third pillar of things we need to consider. So let's think about chemicals first. So if we have a chemical that perturbs our network here and a chemical that perturbs our network here, and they both impact an adverse outcome here, we can now consider this chemical a modifying factor for this chemical a modifying factor for this chemical, or we could just consider this one interconnected network and look at how the combined flux from all of these perturbations would impact this adverse outcome. So we see that if we start defining these things in terms of networks, these downstream modifying factors just fall out. In addition, there's no reason that we can only define AOPs in terms of chemicals. We can have stressors such as disease, such as genetic polymorphisms. Pretty much anything that perturbs the system could be a molecular initiating event. And so you could describe these things in terms of your AOP network. And so now if you imagine that one of these is not a chemical but a different perturbation, or if you have a direct perturbation on one of your intermediate key events, all of these things can be captured in terms of these AOP networks. But then the criticism there is, okay, we know what we know, but what about everything else? And so if we wrap this up and start looking at the unknown true network with all these gray boxes in here, we're still a long ways off. So is there anything we can do for that? Well, we can try. So one of the efforts we have ongoing parallel to the KB effort is an attempt to guess or infer what this network might look like by using all of the high content and high throughput data that we have available to us in the public sphere. We can then make our guess at the global network, extract out sub-networks from that, and then funnel those into this expert-driven process that I've just talked about. And that would be facilitated by our knowledge base to then expand the known network. So now we get fewer gray balls in our known network. But we can also use the expert feedback on these things to improve our predictions here. And so over time, hopefully this gets closer to truth. It'll never be truth. But we also will get more and more of this piece, which does represent truth, filled out. And so, as I mentioned before, this piece is very well covered by the two modules that I've already mentioned, the Effectopedia and AOP Wiki modules. This piece we are hoping will be enabled by the AOP Explorer module, which will be coming out this fall. And again, that's mainly because it allows you to look at everything in terms of this global network or subsets of that global network. So it's very well suited towards the type of data that we're generating in these high throughput approaches. So what is our current status of AOP development? So there's over 100 putative AOPs in the AOP Wiki. Most of these are not under active development, so if there's anyone who would be interested in adopting and pushing these forward, please take a look. You can see them all. You don't need a login or anything. And if you're interested in working on them, just contact the authors. We do have 13 formal AOPs undergoing OECD review, in addition to 6 that have been endorsed by the OECD. 5 of those were just endorsed this past June. And then, as I mentioned before, the quantitative AOPs are a much bigger endeavor. But there's an increasing emphasis with prospective studies on really focusing in this area, and so there's an increasing number of these under development at this time. And this just shows the 6 OECD endorsed AOPs, and basically what that means is they've been endorsed by 2 of the major working groups within the OECD. So there's the working group of the National Coordinators for Test Guidelines, or the WNT, as well as the Task Force on Hazard Assessment. And that name changed recently, but I couldn't remember what it was. So these are available on the Wiki. You can see them on the Wiki. There are also official static versions of the OECD endorsed version of the AOP that's on the OECD website. So the Wiki handles that living document, Principle 5, from our 5 principles before, whereas the OECD will maintain their official copy of the version that was endorsed. We do have options in the Wiki for determining what the difference is between the version that was endorsed and the current living document, should you ever need to know. Just to highlight, I won't go through all the individuals in the interest of time, but again, this is a collaboration between the US EPA, and we're primarily responsible for the Wiki. The Joint Research Center for the European Commission, they're primarily responsible for the AOP XML and the Intermediate Effects Database. The OECD is primarily responsible for Effectopedia and the eAOP portal. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for the AOP Explorer module, as well as the ongoing maintenance of the core AOP ontology, which I'll talk about in a moment. So as I said at the beginning, the reason for this talk at this time is that we have a major release for the Wiki coming up in November. And what the main goals behind this release are shown on this slide. So we want to provide more information through web services. So early on, we were primarily based on a media wiki background, hence the AOP Wiki name. We will actually be moving to a WikiList wiki in November, where we get rid of the media wiki and will be entirely based in Rails. So with that comes a little less flexibility in how rapidly we can prototype new things, but we'll become much more able to provide all of our information through web services. And so we won't actually have the new web services in November. They'll be coming online in 2017, but everything we've done for this November release will make that possible. We're also incorporating ontologies to better characterize the key events. This helps both in new authors being able to find the correct key event if they want to reuse it, because right now the naming is pretty out of control in the current wiki. But it will also facilitate more quantitative work in the long run by having these things tied specifically to formal entities. We're hoping to facilitate the OECD review process. As I mentioned, once you get all of the information into the wiki, you can create a document that is actually reviewed by the OECD. We're trying to make those documents closer to what the OECD publishes to make it a little easier on the authors once they are endorsed. Improved help. So right now you kind of need the handbook on your desk alongside the wiki so that you can go back and forth. We're going to try and embed a lot of that information into the wiki itself so that you get the information about the field you're trying to fill out right there along with the field. We're also hoping to include better handling of chemicals. So since the EPA is doing most of the development on the wiki module, we do have the ability to connect that very efficiently with the CompTox dashboard and the chemistry back end for that. And so we hope that will not only help keep the chemical lists in the wiki clean, but it will also facilitate incorporating AOP information into the ToxCast and other reports that the EPA generates. If anyone is interested in seeing the new version before it goes live, we will have a test version available sometime in September. Just contact me if you're interested, and I will send you the URL as soon as it's available. So as far as talking through this, I'm going to briefly go through the ontologies, and then I will give you just a few screenshots of what the new wiki is going to look like, with a particular emphasis on differences from the current wiki for anyone who's familiar with the current wiki. So the ontology that I mentioned before, there's a core AOP ontology. This was developed by Lyle Burgoon and Kyle Painter while they were here at EPA. It is currently maintained by Lyle Burgoon in his new position at the Army Corps, and he's been doing extensions for this for another purpose. But you can see that we have this idea of a chemical initiator, which we're migrating towards a stressor here to account for non-chemical perturbations. We have the concept of key events, key event relationships, our special key events, and then, of course, we need a specific construct for an AOP. But you can see this is very minimal, and it includes no biology, and that's intentional. Like I said, there are multiple organizations that are looking to extend this core ontology. I'm only going to talk about what we are doing here at EPA specifically to facilitate the AOP Wiki work. And our emphasis right now is on key events. This also could apply possibly with some modifications to key event relationships. But as I mentioned before, our main driver for this is our key event naming has gotten out of control, and we really need to rein that in. So we're going to start defining key events not only in terms of the author given title, which is now currently how they are done, but also in terms of specific components, and it can be one or more because we have multiple examples where more than one is needed. So moving forward after November, if you're putting an AOP in the wiki, you will have to provide at least one event component for your AOP in addition to your free text title. And this event component is going to be defined in terms of 3 terms that will all be pulled from a controlled vocabulary. You will do a term for process, a term for object. It will be possible to include one or the other of these 2 terms, so you'll have to have at least one. You will not necessarily have to have both. And then you'll need an action term. And this is similar to the current structure of the event titles, again, with the difference being that moving forward, these will have to be selected from controlled vocabularies. And those controlled vocabularies will all be driven by formal ontologies, not developed by us. So in this example, we show the gene ontology as a possible ontology for the processes and objects. The action terms are actually a subset from the pedo ontology. In addition, we've always had a tissue organ context for our events, but it became clear that we really needed that context to be dependent on our level of biological organization, because just knowing tissue and organ, if you're looking at a molecular event, isn't really as informative as we would like to be. So we have a new context term, also will be driven by formal ontologies. And if you're at this level, it's going to be driven by a cellular ontology. If you're at this level, it will be driven by an organ ontology. Once we get to individual populations, we really don't need a separate context because we already capture this information in terms of the key event itself, and it's really largely redundant by the time you're at that level. So just as an example of how this would be applied, if we take a key event from one of the existing AOPs, this key event is at the cellular level of organization. So if we describe an event component, we can pull processes from the gene ontology. In this case, we actually have two different processes, gene expression and translation. So technically, if we were doing this in the wiki, this would relate to two event components. Our object in both cases from our protein ontology is vitellogenins, and our action is decreased. And so now we have described this free text title in terms of our processes. Our context is liver, and since we're at the cellular level, we want to define that a little more, and it turns out this is in the hepatocytes within the liver. So that would be our cellular context. And we can do this for the whole AOP, and again, we could have multiple event components for certain key events. We're in the process of going and tagging the existing AOPs. We'll be working with the AOP authors over the next couple months to get that done so that when we migrate to the new wiki, all of this would be pre-populated for the existing AOPs. And this just summarizes, so again, the things that really are being added to the formal ontology, they're not really being added to the wiki, is the level of biological organization and a couple of terms at the event level. We're adding both to the wiki and the formal ontology this idea of an event component. And then all of these things are actually inheriting. So we are extending the existing ontology, but not by making changes ourselves to the ontology. We're inheriting from these existing ontologies. So we have no intention of building ontologies of our own beyond what you see here. We're just going to inherit from the existing ones. So there is an OECD work group that's overseeing these efforts. So we have our KB group that's been working on this. In particular, I want to highlight Clemens and Ivana, who've been working very closely with us on the stuff I showed you, and Lyle, who's maintaining the core ontology. But then we also have a broader work group that kind of oversees the work. And it couples with some other internal work we have that Ronglin Wang is driving here at EPA. So just in the last 5 minutes or so, I do want to flip through a few screenshots. So this is what the wiki looks like today. And so our navigation is really restricted to this corner. And if you scroll down the page, it just disappears. Our actions are also on this sidebar. So the nice thing is they're always in the same place. But again, the downside is if you scroll down the page, they disappear. The table of contents not only disappears if you scroll down the page, but as you can see, when you first pull up the page, it takes up a good chunk of your real estate until you start scrolling down. So the first thing you'll see with the new thing is we've tried to clean this up a bit. So now the navigation that involves AOP components is always at the top. So it's out of the way, it's much less intrusive, and it's always there. So as you scroll down the page, that top bar will always be there. The navigation links that you would use less often are down at the bottom, but once again, that's always going to be there. So the top and the bottom, those navigation links will always be present. The table of contents since we've moved the other stuff out of the sidebar, we have the sidebar available for our table of contents. So now when you look at the content, it starts at the top of the page. But the other nice thing about this is this sidebar actually moves with the page. So no matter where you are on the page, you have all of your navigation available to you. All of these are clickable, so if you're at the bottom and want to go to the top, you just click on a link and it will take you to the appropriate heading. The AOPs, so currently we have an AOP list view and AOP table view. It was determined that the table view was more useful, so pretty much all of the views in the new wiki are table views. The main view, if you just click on AOPs, you're going to get all the information in one huge table. So all of the AOPs will be shown. If you want to create a new AOP, it's over here, so it's no longer in the sidebar, but it's pretty readily accessible. And then the table has 3 different status symbols that you can use to sort by. So the first one is author status. That's self-explanatory. SAAOP status, anybody wants to know what SAAOP stands for, they can ask me afterwards. For right now, we're just going to say that's anything not on the OECD work plan. And then OECD status, conversely, is anything that is on the OECD work plan. And so, and the OECD status is really what drives the current AOP list view. And so if you want to see that, there will be links, which we will have more informative names for when we go with the formal release. But there will be links to a page for both the OECD and SAAOP groupings. So the OECD will give you something analogous to the current AOP list view. Instead of the status being listed within the table, it will form the subheadings for that page. And you can scroll through those subheadings or click these links to navigate through. The SAOP, again, has a smaller number of AOPs that haven't yet made it to the OECD work plan. And it also will have a small number of AOPs that are archived, and these actually will not be visible to most users. And these are for AOPs that we've decided need to be deleted, but we either need to keep them until the data is migrated to a current AOP, or that we haven't made a firm decision yet that they need to be deleted. The user roles aren't going to change dramatically. The major changes is we're adding a new role of gardener, and these folks are going to have really the permissions that authors currently have, and that is all of the AOPs and other things within the wiki. They'll be able to edit. And the idea behind this is we're going to have a smaller number of experienced AOP developers, people who have already moved AOPs well down the process, to kind of help other AOP developers stay with the guidance that's in the OECD handbook and the published principles surrounding this. So this will be a smaller number of people who will help out on a large number of AOPs. Authors in the new wiki, where basically you will have all of the same privileges that were stated in the current wiki, but we are locking down some of those. So whereas before the guidance was don't edit an AOP unless you're a member of that project, now you can't edit an AOP unless you're a member of that project. The other 2 users will have all of the same access that they had with the previous wiki. And the thing to highlight is to become an authenticated user, all you need to do is self-create an account and verify your email. So you can comment on everything in the wiki without any further approvals needed. And as always, all of the content of the wiki will be available for people to see. So this just is a quick showing what's editable by authors. So you would edit all of this information the author would edit on their AOP page. These are things that are going to be limited to the gardeners, and specifically within the gardeners we have people from the OECD that will manage these and other folks that will manage these. And so these buttons will not be seen by most people. They will be limited to people who have that gardener role. As I mentioned before, the authors, so currently we have a text-based author list that will be maintained, so you do not have to have a wiki account to be listed as an author on these things. This is what will go into the printed documents. But in addition to that, we're adding a corresponding author. We may change this, so if people have opinions, let me know, because it may cause some confusion with the corresponding author up here. But we will have a point of contact or an owner, shall we say, and this person does have to have a wiki account, hence the naming right now because we haven't migrated users yet. And then we'll also have contributors. And so to edit an AOP, you're now going to have to be on this contributor list, and then the corresponding author kind of maintains this and is also the point of contact for the AOP. We'll have the event list as we have now. Again, authors will maintain the ability to edit all of the events and relationships within the wiki just as they have now. Gardeners will also have those abilities. However, deleting events will be a gardener role, and again, this is not something an individual would decide to do on their own. We have a process for that that we do, but we are trying to make it because we've had people requesting that we be able to delete stuff for them. When you're actually editing the AOP, we're going to have a much nicer interface than the MediaWiki interface. So for one thing, you can do all the text sections from one page, so you're not clicking on one section at the time and editing it. You can also edit more than one section and save all of those changes at one time. You will be able to easily create tables in the wiki, which you can't really do now. I mean, you can, but you have to know wiki markup, which is not simple. And it will also be what you see is what you get. So whereas currently you see the wiki markup until you either preview or save the page, now if you say I want something bold, it's going to show bold in the edit window itself. As I mentioned before, we're going to add these ontology tags, so all of these will be specified via controlled vocabularies within the wiki. And the comments, we're moving to a more modern comment structure as opposed to the discussion pages in the current wiki where you post a comment, you can post replies to that comment. So again, pretty standard stuff. We will maintain all of the changes, the logging of changes from the MediaWiki. And in fact, the logging will actually be a little bit more efficient now because everything's going to be tracked in the same system. So it should actually be an improvement there. You will be able to see differences among the different versions as you can with the current wiki. And again, the wiki is really a joint product of all of these groups. They all have input into the wiki, but somebody has to actually make it happen, and for that I want to highlight the 5 really energetic students that we've had working on this, 3 of whom are here in the room. So if anybody wants to congratulate them later, you can. And so again, this is one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Hopefully I've convinced you that it's a valuable puzzle, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. As I'm unmuting the phone line, if anybody in the room has any questions, feel free to speak up.
The leader has unmuted your line.
And the phone line is unmuted now, so anybody on the phone is welcome to speak up as well. Last call for questions on the phone line or on the chat box?
Yeah, this is Dan Levy from the FDA.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, I'm wondering if you guys have any strategy for doing like a pilot regulatory assessment so that you can sort of work with a regulatory agency to accept data that's been analyzed through one of these AOPs to make a regulatory decision?
There's definitely, yes. So I'd say so EFSA for one, the European Food Safety Authority, they've had several training sessions and are looking at how they could use it. I know, again, the intermediate effects database is the intent there is to try and funnel some of this stuff through the iEuclid system in Europe. Obviously, internally here at EPA, we're trying to think through these things as well, and have some internal pilots going with different program offices and different use cases. The Task Force for Hazard Assessment at the OECD, when they met back in June, they brought up the need for these types of case studies. So there's definitely quite a bit of effort on that. Matter of fact, I would say the emphasis has shifted within the AOP community. Up until the past maybe 12 months, most of the emphasis was on kind of defining these principles for AOP development and trying to come up with the best way to represent the science. And so regulatory purposes obviously were part of that consideration because we wanted to build something that would be usable, but really the emphasis was on how do we build the tools for use, not how do we use them. And really over the past 12 months, that emphasis has shifted. Pretty much everyone involved, the emphasis has shifted to really, okay, now we have a critical mass of AOPs. We want to keep developing AOPs, but how do we use them? Now that said, obviously the more the better. So if you have ideas for some other pilots that we could do, in particular, I'm not aware of any with FDA, we would love to talk to you about how we can make that happen.
So it looks like we also have a question on the chat box. To what extent are regulatory bodies starting to look at these new AOPs, any in the U.S.? Could AOPs be useful for environmental remediation management?
Okay. Yeah, so I think I kind of touched on that with the last one. So yes, we are working with most of the program offices, including, and of course I've forgotten the new acronym. They used to be OSWR, the Solid Waste Group, but they handle the Superfund remediation. So we have had discussions with them on how these might be used. They are being incorporated into the dashboards, which are intended to facilitate those uses. So we're definitely moving in that direction. We're always happy to have more people help us move.
Any other questions on the line or on the chat box?
Yeah, hi, this is Jeff Patton from FDA. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. There is a lot of data in Kesseret and Dool and Goodman and Gilman, and I think you might have hinted that there is an organized effort to try to capture some of the existing knowledge like that. Is that true?
Yes. Again, it's not as systematic, I think, as we'd like it to be. I've even heard floated the possibility of some of the academics possibly incorporating this into their coursework. I know that Dale Johnson at UC Berkeley did this last spring. I don't think he was focused on, I think they were actually looking at new AOPs. But one of the things that had been floated was, it would really be great just to go back and kind of capture some of that existing knowledge in this more structured manner. So there's some ad hoc efforts in that area, but certainly it would be great if we could expand that.
Anybody in the room? Everybody good? Any other last-minute questions? We got time for maybe one more. All right. Well, thank everyone for participating, and thank you so much, Steve, for leading the webinar. So just a reminder to everybody, we will be back in late September with Agnes Caramel. She will be presenting on the evaluation of food and relevant chemicals in ToxCast. But until then, I hope everybody has a good week. Thanks.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.